Hello dear learners, welcome you all to the second unit of application of social work in the social milieu. Today we will be doing the roles of social work when it comes to women's development. So I am Dr. Kasturi Sinha Ghosh, Assistant Professor in Social Work, Netaji Subhash Open University. Well, in the last unit we have dealt with, we have understood the problems of women, the status of women in our country, and the various initiatives that Government of India has taken for their development and empowerment. Now, we have to understand how as a social workers we can work with women and go for various activities which will ultimately lead to the women empowerment of our society. For this, we have to understand the status of women as we have already dealt in the last unit. So, this will give us a clear picture about the condition or the living status of women of our society, like their education status, their status in when it comes to employment, their health status. So once we know their overall condition, living condition, we will be in the position to understand or to understand what is the existing problem when it comes to women development, like what are the barriers of women development. So this will help us to work in a more better fashion, because now we at least know how to go about, how to or what are the departments where we have to work on. Second is understanding the community belief and the cultural history. You see, as we all know that there is a principle of individuality in social work. One of the important principle of social work, which says that each and every individual are different. Why they are different? They are different because of their socialization pattern, because of their personality, their upbringing, or the background from where they come from. So it is important to know the background. That is why we have to understand the community belief and the cultural history. What is the kind of community in which the women are living? What are the various beliefs, taboos, and the traditional practices, cultural practices of that particular society? Next, we have to understand the power relationship that exists within the society in which the woman is dwelling, because this power relationship will help us know the structure of the society, like who is the dominating segment and who are the people who are being victimized or who are marginalized. You see, at times it happens that in a patriarchal society, men, of course, we know they are the ones who dominate the society, who dominate the entire community. But it is also interesting to note that at times women also speak, or they also become the mouthpiece of patriarchy. So therefore, this is important for us to know that who is actually the powerful segment, or who are the powerful segment of a particular society. Therefore, it is important for us to understand the power relationship of the society. Next, finding out the resources available for the women folk and also understand whether they have access to these resources. What are the various resources that a women folk would need? education, economic independence for which they need some kind of employment or health, whether they have access to healthcare facilities. So therefore, you have to understand whether these resources are prevailing in the society. And if at all they are prevailing, are women folk entitled to access these resources? Or what is stopping them from getting an access to these resources? Next, carry out a thorough gender analysis to know the gender gap. Now, to understand gender analysis, the term gender analysis, we have to first know that what is gender analysis like. So, why and what is the need of doing gender analysis? Like, as a social worker, we have to understand the fact that in our society, there are people with various kinds of gender identities. It can be men, women, or transgenders, or any other, persons who have a choice to adopt any kind of gender identity. So therefore, you have to understand as a social worker that why it is important to know about gender analysis and why it is important to carry out gender analysis. Well, gender analysis is a very important process because it helps us to understand the gaps between the various genders. Like, there are various gender roles assigned to different genders of our society. Now, gender roles should be understood so that we understand the differences between various genders, because this will help us to know the actual living condition of the various genders in terms of their participation in various economic activities, control of assets, the decision making power. Now, once we conduct gender analysis, we will understand the gender gap, like which gender is superior and which gender is marginalized. So, who are getting major access to resources and who are not getting these resources. For this, we have to do extensive research activities to understand the gaps, the gender gaps. Therefore, gender analysis is very important because this will enable us to understand the gender gaps that exist in our society. Now, once we know the gender gaps, it will help us to frame better strategies for gender sensitive schemes in our society. Therefore, we will be able to formulate better gender policies can be framed if and only if we conduct good gender analysis in our society. Once we have done the gender analysis, this will help us to frame gender blind and gender neutral policies without favoring any particular gender. Now, once we know like how to go about while dealing with women or while working for the empowerment or development of women, now let us see what should be the role of social workers in promoting women's development. First and foremost is, why not adopting a community engagement method? Well, in our society, we know that a large chunk of the women folk in our society are not that literate. The literacy rate is still 65.1 as per the last census. So, there are quite a lot of women in our society who are not literate, or they just can sign or they just can put their signature, but that is not literacy. Therefore, how do we how do we understand their problem? How do we, it is not possible to, send them interview a questionnaire or, conduct in-depth interview with them. Therefore, it is a kind of pragmatic way to get information from this source, that is the community engagement method. What we do is, in this particular method, we can conduct some, we can frame some tools, maybe like focus group discussions and other participatory appraisal, rural appraisal tools, so that we can involve the women, we can understand the problem from their perspective. Particularly focus group discussion is a very important tool when we work in rural areas, because in this, a group of women are invited to form a group, to have a discussion, and there they talk about their problem, maybe a topic is given to them and they talk about it. Maybe at times, these topics are so familiar and they know that they really feel it to be comfortable when they are within a group. Therefore, they talk in a more, without any restrictions, they talk about their problem and they can argue, they can have a discussion without any inhibitions or any restrictions. Therefore, community engagement method is a very good method where we can understand the problem of the woman from their perspective. Next, group work, again, that is also a kind of the community, one of the method that is applied as a primary method of social work. Therefore, group work can also be applied so that women can share their experiences, they can understand each other's problem and how others solved their problem, how others look at various problems. So, this helps them to understand each other's perspectives and also develop their own concept of the problem. Next is awareness generation program through community organization. Again, community organization is the third method of the primary method of social work. This is a method which helps to cater a larger population. So, here we can have women in a larger number and we can talk about their problem, and these awareness generation camps or programs are very helpful as we can use various kinds of aids like visual aids, audio visual aids to reach the women folk. And as a matter of fact, we can suggest that why only women? To make the whole system more gender sensitive, we can also invite men to understand the problem. Because when we talk about, say for example, we talk about domestic violence and how to deal with domestic violence. So, while arranging a camp or while arranging a awareness generation program on domestic violence, if we only invite women of a particular community to participate, then the men folk would remain deprived of the various discussions that would take place in the awareness generation program. So, they will not be able to understand the various kinds of legal provisions that are there and what are the consequences of domestic violence and what are the various measures that, the legal measures prevailing for the people who are actually promoting or who are actually causing domestic violence. So, it should be a more gender sensitive way of tackling issues, even the men folk of the communities along with the women in these awareness generation program. Next, I come to the strength-based approach of social work. Well, this theory, the strength-based theory, is a very important theory these days that we have to understand. Well, social work was previously understood as a problem-solving profession. However, social work is just not limited to problem solving. It is also a profession which helps people to know their capacity, to know their inner strength, what they can do and what they are good at. Unless and until a person is confident about his or her own strength, his or her own capacities, the person will not act accordingly. So women in our society are often marginalized because they are being thought as the second sex of the society, and they are the people who are being considered as they have no knowledge, they are not capable of doing anything, and they are only good at kitchen and other household activities. Therefore, as a social worker, we know that each and every person have some or the other skill, inner skill. Now, this strength-based approach will help the social worker to find out the skill or the capacity that a person has. So, once we apply the strength-based approach while working with the women community of our society, we will be able to know their inner capabilities, what they can do, what they are good at, and this will help them to, to grow self-confidence, be capable of doing some economic or taking up some economic activities, and thus become empowered economically, socially, culturally. Therefore, strength-based approach is a very important approach that a social worker must apply while working with the women folk of our society. Next, let's talk about the strong advocacy for policy change as well as implementation. Well, we know that as social workers, we can carry out advocacy. This is one of the important tasks that a social worker has to do. Well, there are so many policies that exist in our society, or the government has framed several policies, but how far are these policies catering to the interest of the women? This is important to understand. Now, if there are policies, but if they are not actually helping the women to develop, then these policies are of no use, they are of no meaning. Therefore, social workers may spearhead movement so that they can make efforts to either change these policies and or conduct advocacy to bring about new policies which are for the interest or which would promote development and ultimately empowerment of the women folk of our communities. Therefore, strong advocacies from social workers can help or can actually pressurize the policymakers and other lawmakers to frame strategies so that it is more women friendly in nature and that would ultimately lead to women's development. Establishing linkages. Well, as social workers, we know that we are resource persons, we know. So, we know who can help in what respect. Therefore, we have to form linkages. We have to link community members with the several services or the service providers who can help the community members or the people who are in need of some support so that they can achieve what they want. Therefore, establishing links can help people to understand what they actually want, because it so happens that there are so many information, there are so many services that are there, or there are so many schemes and programs that are available in our society, but most of the women of our society, they don't even know about these services, and they don't even know how to avail these facilities. Therefore, as a social worker, we can bridge the gap and establish linkages. Next, we are the gatekeepers. What actually do we mean by gatekeepers? Like, we are the people who allow, or we can help the right person to get the right facility. Suppose there are people who are from, they are from below poverty level, from below poverty line, and these people, they fail to get access to, say, some employment schemes, because the criteria of that particular employment scheme is that the beneficiaries or the consumers must be from the below poverty line. However, as gatekeepers, we have to find out if someone, from above poverty line comes to avail the facility, we can immediately stop him, and we should only allow the access to such scheme to people who are from the below poverty level. So, this is one of the example that I could give as social workers, how we can become gatekeepers. So, as gatekeepers, we will help the women who are actually eligible to get the facility, to avail the facility, or must, have the legitimate right to get the access. Now, next we are the enablers. We enable people to know their rights, to know their entitlements. So, as enablers, this is important. We can help the people to know their entitlements. We are educators. We can give right information. We can educate people. Like, again, we can, as a resource person, we can give the right information, because, as I already discussed, that because due to, lack of information or lack of knowledge about their rights, people often are deprived of their entitlements and legitimate rights. Therefore, as social workers, we can help them to know about their rights and about what they are actually entitled to, for which we are the resource persons. So, and again, as this is our duty as social workers and as resource person, that we should also have knowledge about the various schemes and policies that are existing for the women folk of our society. So, that is again an important aspect, that the social workers herself or himself should also be equipped with the knowledge. As a facilitator, again, we can facilitate several activities, we can promote several activities for the welfare of the women, and as motivators, we can help the women folk to understand, or to help them, to become empowered. So, we can help them to become empowered and understand what they can do. So, this is, we can motivate them to understand their capabilities, their skills. Therefore, we as motivators can really do wonders and help women to live with respect and dignity. So, these were the basic roles that social workers can play. Next, let us understand the feminist perspective while working with women. Well, feminist perspective, when we talk about feminism, what we want to discuss is that feminist perspective is not anti-male. Okay, as feminists, we would like men and women to work together, because we are vouching for equity. So, therefore, we are not anti-male. So, now let's discuss about the various facets of feminist perspectives while working with the women. Voice and participation. Well, it emphasizes the significance of involving women in decision-making process, and respecting their autonomy and designing interventions that cater to their specific needs and goals. So, women are decision makers. We have to make them understand that can do it. And as we have already discussed before, that we have to make women understand their capabilities. So once they understand their capabilities, once they know what is good for them, and once they understand what they are entitled to, they can become decision makers. They can choose, they can have choices, they have opportunities, and they can choose. And thus, in this way, we can respect their autonomy. Second, adopting strength-based approach. We have already discussed before that the strength-based approach, this is an approach which in true sense is empowering in nature, and it is rooted in feminist principles, as it empowers women by leveraging their strength and resources and promote collaboration and decision making in their best interest. Trauma-informed care. Well, we have to work with women who are victims of domestic violence or any other kind of violences. Therefore, feminist social workers often use trauma-informed care approach to support and heal the women who are the survivors of various kinds of violence which are gender-based in nature. Then ethical consideration. Feminist social workers, they challenge the existing traditional ethical standards and encourage the social workers to critically examine the various kinds of biasness that exist in our society. And for them, the well-being and ensuring the rights of the women are the prime priority. Then we come to social justice. Well, feminist social workers are dedicated to promote social justice, and this is done by addressing the systematic issues and contribute to gender-based and contribute to fight against the various kinds of gender-based discrimination and inequality, and thus advocacy for policy changing and social reform is the prime goal of feminist social workers for establishing social justice in our society. Empowerment. Well, once we know that women become decision makers, they are able to understand what is good for them, what is not good for them, they can become empowered. Therefore, feminist social work supports or focuses on empowering women and the marginalized groups by providing them with a complete control over their lives and become agentative in taking their own decision. Last but not the least, the research and education. Well, to understand the problems, to understand the various kind of gender related issues, to explore so many kinds of problems that a woman or the women of our society are going through, extensive research is required. Therefore, feminist social work theory, it guides and tells us to carry out researches, explore gender related issues, evaluate practice, and it is thought that social work education should prepare future practitioners like you to effectively address gender-based disparities. So this was all about the feminist aspects. Now let us just quickly know what are the various NGOs who are working in the field of women development. So here are some of the NGOs in the field of women development. To start with, Vimochana. Vimochana is perhaps the oldest NGO which is based in Bangalore, and this NGO was founded in the year 1979 and it works in the field of women welfare and development. SEVA, that is Self-Employed Women's Association. This particular organization is committed for strengthening the movement of women in the informal economy by highlighting their issues at the national level and building its member organizations capable to empower women workers. Therefore, the idea of SEWA is economic empowerment of women. Sanglab. Sanglab is a non-governmental organization which was established by late Indrani Sinha in the year 1987 in Kolkata. This organization is dedicated to protect the rights of women and girls. Snehalaya. This organization was formed by Dr. Girish Kulkarni in the year 1989. It is committed to eradicate all kinds of inequality, discrimination, cruelty against women and children, and it also supports the LGBT communities. Acid Survivors and Women Welfare Foundation. This organization was established in the year 2010, and this organization supports the survivor of the violence against women who are victimized due to acid attacks, and it also includes issues like trafficking and domestic violence. Gudiya India. Gudiya India is another organization which is committed to combat child prostitution and second generation prostitution, and it is a organization which is situated in the northern India. Mitti Ke Rang. Mitti Ke Rang is an organization which works for the livelihood, for generating livelihood of women through its e-commerce platform. Akshara. Akshara is another organization which takes up a three-dimensional vision for change, that is, changing hearts and minds of young women and men, impacting public attitude, and reforming systems that deny gender justice. So, all of these organizations work in different aspects like, socio-economic development of women, economic empowerment of women, but the idea is to give gender justice, to establish gender justice in our society. Now, what should a social worker do while working with women? Establish good rapport with the women client. Otherwise, the women client will not have confidence on the person with whom she is working. She will not, talk about her problems freely and without any inhibition. Therefore, establishing good rapport is the first step. Fix up sessions according to the convenience of the women. We know that Indian women are completely committed and dedicated to carry out her household activities first. That is her first priority. Therefore, she is she is basically engaged fully in, her child rearing process, helping her husband in other household activities. Therefore, it is important for us to understand or fix up a time according to her convenience when she can come and feel free to talk about her problem. Next is, we have to regard their cultural values and understand the socio-economic background. Again, it is important for us to understand the background, her cultural beliefs, her taboos, so that we don't hurt sentiment. We have to be empathetic, of course. Without empathy, we have to understand the problem from her perspective. Therefore, we have to be empathetic. We should be non-judgmental, and above all, we have to understand the life world of the woman from their perspective, what they feel, how they consider their life, what they want, what are their problems, and how do they visualize these problems. Therefore, understanding the perspective of women is very crucial while working with them. Now, we can conclude by saying that as social workers, we are the ones who can promote gender equality. Well, we know that there are, human rights, the concept of human rights is there, it is existing, and there are so many constitutional rights which safeguards the interest of each and every individual of our society. But still, we have to think about women's development, because we know that there is a kind of power relationship which is there in our society. We have to identify those pockets where the power exists, which is creating domination. And in this way, we can understand who are the marginalized section of the society. In this way, we can understand who are the ones who are actually in need of, support. Therefore, we know that government has been chalking out various kind of schemes and programs for the welfare and development and also of empowerment of the people, particularly women of our society. But women are still facing certain challenges, which includes, underrepresentation in politics, unequal pay. There are so many legal barriers. So in a country like us, in a country like India, girls are often seen as less valuable than boys. Therefore, though progress is being made, but we have to still find out ways in which we can establish gender equality and address this problem with more compassion and with in a more pragmatic way. Now, while doing the lesson or while having the discussion, there are certain questions that might be there in your mind. So let us answer, or let's see what those questions may be. Like, why do you think it is important to carry out gender analysis? Next question can be, what should a social worker keep in mind while working with women clients? How can we link strength-based theory with the concept of women's development? And name some NGOs which are working particularly in the field of women's studies or women's development. So this is all for today. Happy learning. Thank you.